everybody got on with everybody.
Yeah, it was
You'd think they'd
fantastic.
all known each other forever and a day.
I know. I think one of those events or one of those occasions where there's a huge amount of goodwill. You start from a good place. Do you know what I mean? The kind of default coming into it is one of optimism and joy. So I felt that in the room and across the whole event. Do you know what I mean? It's not like people showed up being cynical or being like, oh, what's this shit I've got to do today, sort of thing. So yeah, I think when you start from that point, I think success is a lot easier, if that makes sense. It was great. It was wonderful. It was
Yeah,
wonderful.
I have to say I was a little bit worried about how far away the whole, I mean, going all the way down to Bovey Castle, it's a long way for some people.
Yeah,
But everybody said, oh, we'd have gone twice as far for this.
of course you would. It was spectacular. It was spectacular.
Yeah, it really was.
We would have absolutely gone twice as far. It was really good. It was really good, and you're very generous and very kind. It was a wonderful event.
Yes, Ems and I have talked about it and said, is there anything we would have done differently? And I think the only thing we might have done is probably had the casino on a time limit so that people then went and joined the disco.
Good
A
point.
lot of people were on the casino for quite some time.
Yeah, me included. Right, I think we need to get cracking, Penny. You know,
Yeah. Is it now? I'm doing my best to look at the time.
it's after 1
Yeah,
p.m.
I think it's 1 o'clock. Okay. So we will assume that everybody is joining us now, and we will kick off. So I'd like to say welcome. I'm Penny Ferguson, a living leader, and if you do actually know me, but it's lovely to have many people joining us today. As you know, every month now we're doing what's called Conversations with Penny, and it will be unsurprising to you that the people that I'm inviting to join me for a conversation are people that I rate as outstanding leaders. I'm not going to be having somebody on here who doesn't demonstrate amazing leadership. And they're not people that I've just come across, they're people that I have worked with over the years, so have real knowledge of how amazing they are. So today, and I'm going to let him share how long we've known each other, mainly because I'm having a senior moment and can't remember. Um, so what I'm going to do is introduce you to Andrew Cannon, and I'm not going to say more than that, other than say he's going to introduce himself. I'm going to ask you, Andrew, if you will share with people, I think, quite a bit of your background, where you started, it could be just your working journey, it could be part of your life altogether, where your journey started and when you first began to almost understand leadership and its importance. And I don't just mean the words or the academia, but really get it going from head to heart. I'm really beginning to get leadership. So, Andrew, over to you, and thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me, Penny, and thank you for the kind introduction. I really appreciate it. Yes, so my name's Andrew Cannon. I'm the chief exec of a company called Voyage Care. And Voyage Care are the largest provider of registered care for people with a learning disability in the UK. So we are, unless you're in or adjacent to this space, you've probably never heard of us, but we're in about 600 locations nationwide, a staff team of about 11,000. We have more good and outstanding services than anybody else in health and social care. So in terms of the kind of independent regulators view, we're the highest quality provider by some distance, I should say, as well. The average percentage of good and outstanding services in social care is about 80%, depending on how you slice the data, and we're at 93, 94%. My background, gosh, where to start, Penny? Where to start? Thinking about it. I mean, I was telling you before we came on, I've had loads of different jobs. In fact, I'll tell you this. So we've known each other 20 years, right? But 30 years ago, I was working in a Burger King in Llandudno in North Wales. And not as a kind of, you might go, oh, as this sort of summer job. It's like, no, that was my job. That was my full-time job. That was my career at that point. I worked on building sites. I worked in factories. I worked sorting. The worst job I ever had was sorting post at the post office. Deathly dull. I've worked in pubs, in bars, in restaurants. I've been a kitchen porter, a labourer on a building site. I think I might have mentioned that one. Got various office jobs and things like that. My career really sort of started when I committed to a kind of a plan and a development for myself. And I think if I'm being on, and that was about 30 years ago. And I think if I'm being honest, to that point, I felt like I didn't deserve anything better, if that doesn't sound too dark and too dramatic. And so I set out a plan for what I wanted to accomplish, just a kind of 3 to 5 year plan in terms of my own personal development. And in terms of getting qualifications, I've been to university, but I hadn't done very well at my A levels. There was kind of a lot going on in my life without going on too much. I went to a not great university and I didn't do that well. So my commitment was I was going to save up my money. I was going to go back to university. I was going to do a master's. And from there, I was going to train as an accountant. And I was going to use that as a springboard into business and into more interesting lines of work. So I managed to do that. I got a training contract as a forensic accountant. And going into that, I thought, somewhat naively in retrospect, but I thought that the skills that I had, the things that I was good at, I felt I was good at, around presenting, around communicating, writing. I'd done history and English at university, were things that you wouldn't normally find in a more typical accountant. So I thought I had this kind of contrary strategy. I was going to acquire skills that didn't necessarily go together to build myself as a more interesting whole. That's not the case, actually. When you get into finance and accountancy, you realize there are loads of kind of very erudite, urbane, very well-read, well-rounded accountants. But that was my kind of naive view from the outside. Anyway, I did that. I worked for a number of firms, and I began to move up. And I think when I went to British Airways in their finance department, it was here I got I got my first managerial role leading people, and I began to first think about. A wiser man would have thought about it before they started managing people. But I got my first sort of idea and thinking about leadership and about what that meant. And I suppose my style at that point was kind of by default. I'm quite interested in people, and I ask a lot of questions by nature. I am just curious. I'm just nosy. I'm interested for understanding. And so my kind of default approach was, well, I'm going to ask these guys what to do to improve the position we're in. The role that I found myself in was, the guy who pitched it to me, who was previously the head of internal audit, had been parachuted into a role in British Airways, and it was in a mess. There was a huge hole in the balance sheet. They couldn't find where all this money had gone. And he pitched it to me as, this is the worst run area of British Airways. And I thought that was incredibly exciting. And my kind of simple logic ran thus, right? Which is, well, if I fix it, I'm going to be like a big hero. And if I can't, it was beyond redemption, and it was the worst run area anyway. Do you know what I mean? So it felt like just kind of all upside. And I suppose that's something I've carried throughout my career, actually, so ever since, which is lots of people are drawn to areas of glamour or status or things that are already quite smooth or seem attractive. But actually, for me, the greatest areas of development and opportunity and progression are in those kind of gnarly, dirty, tough areas, if that makes sense. And so it proved. It was my first area. My kind of default sort of style of being curious and supporting people and acting as a cheerleader worked, and probably more by luck than judgment. And we did really, really well. And from there, I progressed into other roles. I moved back to Manchester, and this is where I first encountered you, Penny. So I was the finance director of a telecoms business, and I met you 20 years ago, 2003. I first went on the Living Leader program then. And it had like I say, I'm always really curious. I read loads. and I study a lot, and I want to learn. But until that point, it hadn't occurred to me, really naive. When I tell these stories, I always look back and it's like, gosh, how naive I was. And I suppose as I've got older, the lesson I've learned is I'm still naive now. I can't step outside myself and see my own naivety and my own shortcomings. But I know that they're there because kind of life has taught me that. My naivety was I hadn't realized that there was a whole body of sort of study and discipline and thinking around leadership and around management. I just kind of assumed it was, well, some people are kind of good at it and some people aren't, and you sort of find your way and you kind of, it's just like being a captain on a sports team or somebody's boss. And the Living Leader program really opened my eyes in a couple of regards, in regards to kind of models of thinking, models of decision making, models of leadership. It was revelatory to me, Penny, and also in terms of the kind of broader thing around leadership outside of work, leadership in your own life, leadership of yourself, with your family, with your home, etc., etc. And the lessons that I learned on that program stay with me and have run throughout my leadership style today. And I put them into practice every day in various forms, and we can develop what those things are. I left that organization because there was a disconnect between me and the leadership, who didn't want to. I was the finance director, there was a chief exec above me, who didn't want to operate in the way that I wanted us to operate as an organization, as a team, as a senior leadership team. And from there, I went to Bupa. We worked extensively with you and the Living Leadership at Bupa across a number of teams. At Bupa, I really got into. I was very fortunate to work with someone who taught me a huge amount around systems thinking, around purpose, around measuring purpose, the methods for improving it, statistical process control charts, analyzing, running experiments, running skunk works, failing fast, all this sorts of stuff. I learned a huge amount there. Continue to be curious, continue to read around this stuff, and we had an enormous impact. I think it's really interesting. People think as you get more senior, you have greater freedom of action. But actually, I think that was the role where I had the greatest freedom of action. I was essentially the customer service director of Bupa. I was running the large call centers. I was running their claims function, underwriting, wellness business, occupational health business, various bits and pieces. And I think, interestingly, back there, I had the greatest freedom of action and movement. People think as you get more senior, you don't have a boss. It's like you always have a boss, believe me. But we made a huge difference there. We made a huge difference. What we were able to do was to navigate people around the healthcare system of the UK and get better outcomes at a lower cost, which is kind of the holy grail in healthcare. It's the thing that, because the cost of healthcare is always increasing as new kit comes on board and people need more treatments and things like that. So to kind of bend that curve was absolutely unheard of. And we did it through navigating people more effectively around the healthcare system in the UK. It was great. I learned a huge amount. I can talk about that in more detail if you like. From there, I ran their Bupa's aged care business, and here kind of purpose and connection and the meaning of what we do really kind of bit for me and took hold. And a brighter person than me would have realized a lot earlier in their career that I have to be in a role that has purpose and has a connection to purpose and a meaning and an ability, and where you're able to make a difference to people's lives very tangibly and very fundamentally and very immediately. And from there, I was headhunted into Voyage Care, and again, we've done work with the Living Leader, as you know, Penny, train the trainer type programs, rolled it out. Voyage Care, we've grown the business really significantly. We sold the business in a very, very successful transaction. We're the highest quality provider in this space. We're the largest provider in this space. It's really rare to be the biggest at something and the best quality. The quality that we have is consistent with being a small bespoke provider. We don't always get it right, but we have an organization which is a learning organization, which is connected to purpose, and where the things that we do are grounded in the difference that we make for for people who deserve happy, meaningful, and fulfilling lives, and often don't get that elsewhere. I'll tell you some facts just before we kind of move on, if that's okay. Some of the things that we're kind of kicking against. So in the UK has a long history of warehousing older or vulnerable people, putting them in a box out of town and sort of forgetting about them so that people don't have to look at them. And how that manifests itself is that, and I've experienced that myself, and how that manifests itself is that people with a learning disability in the UK die on average 22 years earlier than people without a learning disability. Now, your obvious response to that is to say, oh, well, that's because people with learning disability probably got a load of other clinical conditions, probably got a load of other illnesses, epilepsy or diabetes or physical disabilities. And the shocking answer is, no, that's after you've adjusted for all the clinical conditions. They're just dying earlier. And the conclusion, therefore, is that it's because of inequality of access to healthcare, and it's because at some level their lives are therefore worth less than someone who doesn't have a learning disability. It's essentially eugenics through inaction and lack of care by government, by ministers, by policymakers and commissioners. So that's some of the stuff that we're fighting against.
I find that really scary when you say that. I mean, I can't imagine, because so many people these days have a relation, have a family member who has got some sort of disability. It seems to be more and more common. And if they're dying earlier, when there's no justification behind it, is seriously scary.
It is more common, and it's more common because the good news is, it's a little bit like as people age in this country. The good news is people are living longer with conditions they wouldn't have lived with previously, if you know what I mean. So medical science has moved on. So there's kind of the potential for good news, but we're not able to realize it because of the quality of our thinking as a society.
Okay, I just want to ask you a couple of questions. Before I do, there's something I forgot to say at the beginning. I need to say now. For everybody who's listening, please fire in questions. Send them in, and Katie will read them out to me. If I attempt to read them, I'll have to get my glasses out and start peering at the screen. But please, if there's something you hear Andrew say and you think, I'd really like to know more about that, or how does he deal with that, please just send your questions in. That would be, and if you could do it before we're in the last 5 minutes, that would be very helpful as well. So if you could do that. So Andrew, let's come back to, because you've been using the word purpose a tremendous amount.
Yeah.
Now, I would have to say that almost any organization I go into, please note I do say almost, it's not true of all of them. If I said to anybody at any level, so tell me, what's the real purpose of this organization? I think they'd struggle to answer me. So tell me a little bit, what is your definition of, if you like, the word purpose in an organization? And how the heck do you get people at every level to begin to say, this is the way, what we need to be thinking about every day?
That's a really good question. And I'd echo what you said in your observation, Penny, about lots of organizations have a purpose or a mission or a vision statement or whatever you want to call it. And typically that's been worked up with consultants or amongst the top team, and they agree it, and then it sort of sits in the desk somewhere, or it's on the stationery, or it's on the email. But day to day, it doesn't manifest itself. For me, purpose is really simple. It's a why do you exist? Why does that organization exist? And it's no more than that. What are you here to do? I think you have to be able to articulate it really, really simply, not in sort of highfalutin, really complex. I think it has to be unique and applicable solely to you. And I think it has to guide absolutely everything that you do. And if it to the point where if you're in doubt about two things or two courses of action, your purpose should always guide you in terms of what you do. But what I see, the harder you have to reinforce it. So how do we do it, and how do we make sure that it remains at the forefront of everybody's minds? So the purpose of Voyage Care is to deliver great care and support and to be commercially successful. And we say that very deliberately, and it's been the constant purpose of Voyage Care since I've been the CEO there, which is about 8 years now. It doesn't change. It's on all of the materials you should expect it to be. Every time I do a communications event, whether that's a town hall, which I do every 2 months, or a manager's briefing call for all of the managers, which is every 3 months, or a Voyage leadership meeting, as I did yesterday, which is the top 100 managers, which is also every 3 months. But these cycles interlock, if that makes sense. So multiple events going on. I reinforce that, and I talk about what our purpose is and why we have that purpose. We also structure everything that we do around the purpose. So, for example, bonus for people who receive a bonus. So the purpose is great quality care and support and commercial success. So if you're a service manager, if you manage a home for Voyage Care, and by the way, what we do is not institutional care. These are small community settings. You will probably have driven past a Voyage Care service and not realized it. It's about people leading happy, meaningful, fulfilling lives in the community, right? But if you manage one of those services, your bonus will say, as a gating item, is your service good or outstanding? And if it's not, because it's not been inspected for a while or something, do we believe it's good or outstanding? And if it's not, you don't get any bonus, irrespective of your profit has been amazing. Your EBITDA performance has been amazing. Then, if your service is good or outstanding, then we look at how you perform versus your budget. And if you beat your budget, then you get your bonus. And that is if you like, that's a explicit bonus design. That is our purpose: great care and commercially successful. And we chose those two things because the commercial success is really, really important in social care, because often it's seen as a binary thing. You know, I can do great care, or I can be commercial about it. But actually, this is about delivering a wonderful service and being proud of what we do and making sure that it's sustainable. Because if it's not sustainable, then we cease to offer the service and we can't do it anymore. And the impact that we have on people's lives every day is profound. So I was in a service. I work as a support worker for at least a week every year, as you know, Penny. And back end of last year, I did it for a week in a brain injury rehabilitation service in Manchester. And that service had opened a year previously, and I'd been to that service a year previously. I met a guy called Simon. Simon had a road traffic accident. He was in a wheelchair, lost the use of the kind of his left-hand side, and he couldn't communicate. I went back a year later to work as a support worker. This is just in Manchester, this is in Ardwick, a few miles away. And Simon was walking with the aid of a cane. He'd regained the use of the left side of his body, could communicate, he was going home for Christmas, and he was so excited to be going home for Christmas. And that was accomplished through expertise and skill and support and love. And that's the delivery of our purpose. And there's hundreds and thousands of Simons that we impact every year. So what we do is we design schemes and we design communications that mirror and echo constantly that purpose. And then we do, I could talk about this for hours, Penny. We do all sorts of other things. So for example, one of the big things in the UK is there's scandals around care and health, and particularly when you're working with vulnerable people. And my hypothesis around those things is that those events occur when good people stand by and say nothing, or good people see it and they don't do anything. So we work incredibly hard to create multiple channels. So anybody in the company can write to me. Anybody can appear on these calls and ask questions in the way that people can. On this call, for example, you can write to Ask Andrew. We've got a complaints function. We've got independent third-party whistleblowing line. We create multiple channels to reinforce the delivery of our purpose and why we're here and what we exist to do. And then we measure it. We measure how well we're doing. So we measure, and it's really hard to measure great quality care and support. It's really hard to measure. But that's what we work really, really hard to do at, so it's not just a sort of a theoretical, well, that's a nice thing. You know, it's really tangible. And are we getting better or are we getting worse? And let's be completely open and honest. We have a very flat hierarchy. Although there's 11,000 people, there's only four layers between me and the front line. The senior team are really accessible. I could go on and on and on, Penny. So purpose, purpose is everything. I don't know what we'd do if we didn't have purpose. We didn't talk about it all the time, because I'm not sure what would replace it. I'm not sure how you'd manage an organization. I'm not sure how you'd lead an organization effectively without a purpose running through everything.
Yeah, because if you, in your particular area that you're working, I imagine that the people who are in your organization are some of the most lowly paid anywhere.
Yeah, we don't have anybody who's on the statutory sort of minimum wage. Everybody's on at least 50 pence an hour above that. But yeah, in terms of recruitment and challenging people, right? Some of the systemic conditions that exist in this sector, you'd say, okay, so we're asking people to get paid close to the national living wage, and they could earn a lot more at a supermarket around the corner. And what we're asking them to do is often some really complex clinical things, to deal with some very vulnerable people who can have behaviour that challenges. So they could be kicked or bitten or punched or have feces thrown at them. And so you put it in those terms, you go, well, who would ever want to work in that space? And the answer is people with great values, who want to make a difference, who connect to that purpose, and who see that the work, Simon walking home, going home for Christmas, for example, has real meaning and nobility and a purpose that if you can't find it in this work, you will never find it in any work ever in your life. So we can't compete on salary. We can't compete on some of the things that other sectors and other people take for granted. Sometimes it feels like purpose is kind of all we have. But those kind of stories and the difference that we make, that we reinforce and we share and we praise, and we've got a culture that's open and transparent and concerned with removing the barriers to delivery of our purpose. So another example, how do you keep people purpose alive? Every service I go to visit, and I go to visit lots and lots, as you'd expect, I say, what can I help you do to better deliver our purpose? What are the barriers that exist to delivering our purpose?
So tell me, what is the purpose for you when you go and do this week, or more than 1 week a year, when you go and work in some area? What is your purpose in doing that?
Oh, that's a good question. So, I mean, it's not industrial tourism. It's not marketing. You might have seen, if people are on LinkedIn and they've seen my videos, they'll have seen me do it, but I don't do that for an external audience. That's for an internal Voyage Care audience, really. And I was doing it for years, and I only started putting them on LinkedIn because people were interested. So I thought I'd share my sort of methodology, if you like, because I think it's a better methodology than not doing it, frankly. The reason that I do it is to get curious, about how I can better help people deliver their purpose. So I go and do everything that you'd expect a support worker to do. So I bathe people, I toilet them, I get them dressed, I feed them. So this is not kind of I get protected and I just do kind of bingo calling or whatever, some nice activity. I do it to understand the difference I can make to delivering our purpose, and to understand whether the services I'm doing it in have systemic problems that exist across the whole organization I need to fix, or whether those problems are individual and solely related to that particular service. And I do it to demonstrate leadership, and I expect that all of my senior leadership team do that and get close to where the work goes on and get curious about it. Because for me, there's sorry, I'm pausing. My wife's hoovering outside. Can you hear that?
I just heard it very briefly.
Okay. So for me, there's a kind of, this is a very real and a very, very important thing, right? Which is that to work in this sector, or to work in an organization that I'm part of, I don't want senior leaders and senior managers who sit in head offices and pontificate about what goes on and guess. I want people in the work being curious, being accessible, being transparent, being supportive. This kind of, if I want to see how the paint goes on the car, if I was making cars, go to the factory floor and see how it goes on. Ask the woman or the man doing it, what gets in the way? How could we do this better? I mean, it's just a better methodology, right? Because if you otherwise you're reliant on your own brain to make improvements and to create a kind of culture of continuous improvement and identify things. Whereas if you go and ask people, then you get, in our case, 11,000 brains. So it's just a better method. It's just a better, it's not an ego thing. It's not a status thing. It's not for publicity. It's just a better managerial leadership method. That's all.
The interesting thing is what it's also doing is, and I know that so often in organizations, the feedback loop is really, really poor. People, and nearly always actually, it blocks the level below the top team. And it's where feedback comes up and people think, oh, I don't want to tell the top team that, they won't like that. So they miss it out. But of course, because of what you and your top team are doing and doing this week, you're removing that because you're able to find what's really going on to enable you to make more effective decisions in whatever way.
100%.
And I think that's really interesting. Now, I'm going to have to put my glasses on.
No, I can read it, Penny. We've got a question. Yes.
Oh, you can read it. Brilliant.
Here, Crossland. Here we go. With that purpose, do you see a potential for dilemma? E.g., what if the great quality care isn't the most commercially viable option, which takes priority? Reminiscent of the quality and service story from the PLP. Yeah, good question. Before I come back to that, Dave, by the way, I saw the session that you did with Chris Weston. Love Chris Weston, Penny, last month. I thought it's fantastic. He talks about trust, and he talks about trust a lot, doesn't he? And I think that's really, really important. And for me, the kind of, how do you get feedback? How do you get your team? How do you get a team of 11,000 people across 600 locations trusting you and being honest with you and flagging up issues? Not just with me, but the senior leadership team.
Yeah. And
the answer is that you ask them, and then you act on what they tell you. Which sounds like that's really obvious, but in most organizations there is a knowing doing gap. So people know what needs to be done, and for some reason it doesn't get done. But if you want to create that really powerful learning momentum, what you have to do is take what they've told you and act on it and make it happen. And then guess what happens next is they'll tell you something else, and they'll tell you something else, and you build momentum, right? So you have to, once you go on the floor, once you open this dialogue up, once you get this feedback, you have to front it up. And if you can't do it, say you can't do it. Or if you don't know, you say you don't know. It's fine. We're all human. We're doing our best. But if you get something that's actionable, you've got to make it happen. And then you build learning, you build momentum. So to come back to Dave Crossland's, with that purpose, do you see a potential for dilemma? What if the great quality care isn't the most commercially viable option? It's not a sort of a pure continuum to my mind, Dave. So we'll do the best that we possibly can within the commercial envelope available. And if it doesn't meet our standards, then we'd hand it back or we'd walk away from it, if that makes sense. So Voyage Care has minimum levels of standards in terms of how we assess our own quality, which you'd expect are higher than the external regulator. If we can't deliver that commercially, we'll walk away from it. We won't do something substandard. And I suppose in terms of commerciality, then we'll seek to maximize the commercial outcome from that. But if it's at an acceptable level, that's fine for us. I hope that answers that question. It's not, in reality, or in my experience, it's not quite as binary as you've articulated the question there, Dave. I hope that makes sense. But if not, ping another question in. There you go. All without the use of your glasses, Penny. How was that?
That was good. No, that was good. Katie put it up much more large. Otherwise, I was thinking, God, I'm going to be peering at this. You talked about, with you measuring purpose, linking it to bonus, okay, which sounds really valuable. But what other ways do you think it's possible to measure purpose?
Yeah, okay. So the thing is, if you don't measure purpose, if you don't really measure it, you run the risk that it just becomes that kind of, the senior team came up with the purpose and it's on the letterhead, but sort of day to day. And you see that in most organizations, right? Because whether you measure your purpose or not, you're either measuring the actual purpose, the real reason why you exist, or you're measuring what will become your de facto purpose. So what I mean by that is, if you run a customer service center, call center, most call centers' purpose should be something along the lines of, we exist to deliver great customer service, right, for example. if you've worked in a call center, not a call center, but if you worked in a call center, you'll know what gets measured. What gets measured is average handle time, right? And how quickly you answer the calls. And what that means in reality is that your de facto purpose is answer calls quickly, which is not give great customer service. So whether you choose to set out to explicitly and manifestly measure purpose, you are measuring what will become your purpose, if that makes sense. So you have to set out to do it now. So you say, okay, well that's a bit more complicated because now I've got to measure kind of assessments and feelings and what people thought of that, and so on and so forth. And the answer is, yeah, you do have to do that. You do have to do that. Another example of where you'll all be familiar with this, do you remember when we used to have 4-hour A&E targets in the UK? So people had to be seen in A&E within 4 hours of attending. What happens? People game the system. So ambulances wait outside because the clock doesn't start ticking until you're actively sort of checked into A&E. So you get all these sorts of things happening in systems. So the system begins to get gamed. So how do we measure purpose? Well, most health and care organizations measure like other organizations, things that are easy to measure. So they measure the absence of bad things. So health and care organizations, elderly care organizations will measure medication errors, deaths, falls, unplanned hospital admissions. But here's the thing, right? If you were being cared for, you wouldn't expect any of those things to happen to you. I don't expect to have a fall or to have my meds got wrong. I want to measure, am I leading a happy, meaningful, purposeful life? Am I making friends? Am I going out in the community? Am I gaining new skills? Am I enjoying myself? Do I feel safe? Do I feel secure? Am I building relationships? So we measure those things. We measure all the bad things as well. We measure medication errors and all that sort of stuff. But we also set out to actively measure the delivery of our purpose through breaking it down to what really matters to people. So you have to do that. And then this is a Vanguard consulting sort of methodology. So you have your purpose, you measure your purpose, and then you talk about what are the methods by which you're going to improve the measures to better deliver your purpose. So purpose measures methods. Methods are how you're going to do something. So an example from my Bupa days would be purpose was to give great customer service. And one of the measures we had lots of people calling into the call center because they'd paid a bill and we hadn't repaid them. We'd paid the provider again instead. And we had to figure out how to get this right at source, and we couldn't figure out. We kept getting all these calls saying, I've paid the physiotherapist, and you've paid the physiotherapist as well. You need to pay me back, and of course, a huge amount of admin. Lots of management studies around the cost of rework and how it's 3 times more expensive than getting it right first time, etc., etc. So what do we do? What's the method? The method is broadly sort of get curious. But what we did was we followed an expense claim from a customer all the way through the system. We physically walked it around the building to see what happened. And what happened when the claim got loaded was it defaults to pay the provider. And because in most cases you pay the provider, it just went to the default setting, so it went to the wrong place. So you go, okay, well, how can I fix that? So let's take the piece of paper back where the piece of paper came from. And it came into the post room, of course. Somebody had sent in the expense saying, please can I have this back? So you have to go, well, what's the difference between somebody who's claiming something for themselves and a provider who's sending you an invoice? And the answer, I didn't come up with this, but the answer is handwritten envelopes. So if a bill comes from a provider, it's printed. If an expense claim comes from a member, somebody claim it back, it's handwritten. So what you do then is you say to the mail room, post room, can you sort to one side all the handwritten envelopes? So then we take the handwritten envelopes, open them, give it to somebody, you corral the work, better systems designer say, all of these are pay the individual, not the provider. And instantly you turn off that demand. So that's the method for improving the measure to get closer to your purpose of great customer service.
Wow, that's really fascinating. And I have to say, I'm thinking here now, right, Andrew, how can you help? I need to get you to some of our clients to say, how can you help us start measuring culture? Because that's another absolutely unholy horror to attempt to measure. To say, how do you get that measurement? It's not easy.
No, it's not easy. And it doesn't, you have to iterate and get curious and be available and build a culture of trust and learning and cycle through it. And you're never finished and have got it right, if you know what I mean. And you have to accept that it's messy and difficult to navigate through. And that's why most people default to, I'm going to measure number of calls, or I'm going to measure number of invoices or something, because that's easy to measure. You get your arms around that, you can understand that. Measuring sort of human emotion and feeling and connection is like, oh, that's a bit messy, and I might have to talk to people and things like that. It's a lot easier than you think. It's a lot easier than you think, though.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to say, because some of the clients we're working with now, really interesting, where we're doing rollouts, they're saying you can feel the difference when you walk into the place. You know, you can feel that people are different, they're happier. And it's a case of, yeah, but how do you then convince the powers that be that hold the purse strings to say this is making an impact in your organization? Because there's always other things going on at the same time. So it's a really interesting one. But hearing you talk about purpose makes me say, wow, that could be interesting to look at that as well. And now I need to see, Katie, we've had another question, I think.
We have from Celine. Hello, Celine. How do you attract the right people through your recruitment process so that they will align with your purpose and work to maintain the culture you have built? Great question. You don't always, is the short answer. What we I'll talk about recruitment in a bit. I mean, a lot of what I do is talking about purpose and being curious and having an organization that's high trust, high support, but high expectations, where the role of managers and leaders is to act on the system. And I always use an example of this sort of washing machine repairman. Have I done this with you, Penny, before? Tell us about this.
Yeah, do it again. It's very valuable.
So it's kind of thinking systems output here, which is something I first came across in the Living Leadership programs. So there's a washing machine repairman, right? And he has a target. He works for a less enlightened organization, and he has a target to fix 7 washing machines every day. Now, the first day he fixes 5. What do we think? And the boss thinks, come on, you got to do more than that. You need more from you. And the next day he does 8. Boss says, well done. That pep talk I had with you must have really had an impact. And the next day he does 4. It's like, come on, what are you playing at? And then what you do is you explore, well, what contributes to the variation of what this guy does. He's trained by the organization. The van is supplied by the organization. It's fitted out by him. They get his tools. They train him up. They give him the jobs. They book them. They tell him what route he's going to take and what order he's got to do them in. So, what gets in the way? Bad weather, or the car breaks down, or he's not got the training, or he's not got the right parts, or the customer's not in, and blah, 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 blah. And what you find when you list these out is the vast majority of these things are entirely outside of his control. They are the wider system. And that the role of leaders and managers is, if you want better outcomes, you want better measures, you want better performance, you have to have better thinking to act on the system to make the difference. And yet what happens is, in a lot of organizations, is most people are getting beaten up at the bottom around their performance. Most people are getting kind of, come on, you've got to do more than 4. Actually, why did you only do 4? Let's run through those jobs. Let's get curious. Get curious, not furious. Let's get curious about what happened to you. And, you got sent to the wrong job. You didn't have the tools. The customer wasn't in. How could we overcome these things? So back to Celine's question. We don't always get it right, Celine. Of course, we don't always get it right. And I've created a kind of sense of, probably feels a bit like high trust, high support, lots of love, bit of a hippie commune. Actually, it's not. This is a highly regulated organization in a highly regulated sector, where if we get it wrong, without being dramatic about it, people go to prison. So one of the things that I do as a kind of a manifestation of how we think is, in every other health and care organization that I know, you have a registered individual. So they're registered with CQC or the regulator. And so when you look up a report online, it's their name against it. Uniquely in Voyage Care, there are 2 names on the registration. It is the local service manager, and it is my name. So my name appears in CQC's database, for better or worse, more times than anybody else by miles. And that's a visible manifestation of how I think about the organization, which is we're going to share the risk, you and I. I'm going to give you the tools you need from the center to enable you to deliver our purpose. My expectation is you're going to use those things and you're going to deliver our purpose at the front line. But we bear and we share the risk. So this is a highly regulated sector where if we get it wrong, we have to be ruthless and get rid of people in short order. So what we do is, Celine, we set out to recruit people who have great values. We set out to recruit people who want to make a difference, who see that this is a role that has purpose and meaning, and we try and create for them a development pathway so that they'll stay with us and that they feel rewarded. And social care as a sector, it doesn't have a fantastic reputation, but actually it is a sector where good people with great values who want to work hard and make a difference can go a long way and can be running in sort of reasonably short order a big portfolio, which equates to a really large organization, with turnover of millions and millions of pounds, doing a really broad range of things. So we set out to get people with great values. We work hard to define what they are for us. They'll be unique to Voyage Care. We then test that through the interview process. We try and give people a sense of what the job really entails, because one of the things that we found early in my tenure was had a lot of early leavers, and we discovered, get curious, follow it back down, listen to the calls, listen to the conversations that we've been having. People were sort of embarrassed about saying what the job was and what we were, and so what would in fear that people wouldn't want us, if that makes sense. It's kind of like a relationship thing. You're acting yourself into something else rather than just being who you are. And so what would happen is people would show up and go, I didn't realize I had to take somebody to the toilet or, wash them, and they leave. So the challenge initially for us was, how do you talk about in the abstract a role that has real purpose and can make a difference and ground them in. And this is work, and it's really tough, and it's not for everyone. And so what we did that, and what we found was, surprise, surprise, we had a much smaller pipeline, but we had a much higher quality pipeline. And now as a result of that, we have much lower attrition than the rest of the sector. And people stay with us for an average of, many, many, many years. So we work hard to do that. We work really hard to do that. And then we reinforce it constantly through communication, Celine, through me. I was going to say banging on through me reinforcing it, through the manifestation of things like the bonus, through all of the comms that we do run in that order. Our strategy runs in that order, quality first. So we're constantly kind of reinforcing it. And you're never done. So yeah, we try and get people with great values, and then we're constantly vigilant. I hope that answers your question, Celine. It was a very long answer.
It's a good one there. Andrew, do you think it's easy to find purpose in some sectors and industries than others?
Oh, that's a good question. I have thought about this a lot, right? I have thought about this a lot because the sort of temptation is to think, well, you're making people in the care of Voyage Care can sort of learn to walk again, for example, or develop skills that mean they can lead independent lives and leave care and things like that. So you think, well, that's easy to find purpose in. I think find purpose in anything. I really do. I feel very strongly about that. Now, it might not be as direct and obvious a manifestation as that, but I think you, in any role or in any form of any shape of work, any walk of life, you can find purpose and a connection. And I think there's lots of research around this. You've talked about this, Penny, in the past. This kind of, you can act yourself into a new way of thinking. You commit to these things. You have high standards. You demand a lot of yourself. You will find purpose. You will absolutely find purpose in it. So, yeah, I think you can. I'm less of a fan when it seems like a bit of a reach, if that makes sense. where you can feel the kind of contortion of companies who would really like to have a purpose that's we're saving lives, but they can't because they make cheese and onion pies or whatever. I don't know. But it's like, just have a good, that's great. Do that. I love cheese and onion pies. So make brilliant ones, make the best in the world. Do you know what I mean? It's like, you can find it in anything. You can find it in anything and anywhere, whatever floats your boat. Definitely.
I know that when you went into Bupa, likewise when you joined Voyage Care, they were not quite in the good shape that they were by the time you left. So you really did have quite a significant turnaround in both cases. How do you actually get that ball rolling? How do you handle it if you've got going in as CEO of a top team, whether it's a division of a top team, whatever it is, or a complete CEO? How do you actually get that ball rolling and get people alongside you to begin to understand what it is you're looking to do?
It's a great question. That is a great question. I have left Bupa. I haven't left Voyage Care, obviously. Still here. Love Voyage Care. Yeah. Well, I start, whenever I start with a new management team, I start with the thing that I learned from you, Penny, which is around the building trust exercise, the disclosure exercise around here's my background and stuff. And I always go first, and using you, frankly, as my inspiration, the kind of, I'm super honest and open about, I don't tell lies, right? But about some things that people might think, oh my God, that's wow, bloody hell. And I don't do it to go, oh, I've had a terrible life or what have you, but I do it to make myself vulnerable and to build trust. Chris Weston talks about this, you talk about this a lot, this kind of thing that's always stayed with me from the PLP is, you can't control what you get, you can only control what you give. So I give trust. I give massive, ultimate trust immediately, upfront, unconditionally, through that exercise, typically, Penny. I'll speak very honestly about, I'm kind of low status and low hierarchy. I'm not asked by any of that sort of stuff. The idea of having a big office or a driver or something, it's like, oh my God, that's like the opposite of me. And so I'm very comfortable being open about, I know nothing, or, this is new, or I don't, or I'm going to make loads of mistakes, or what have you. It doesn't, that kind of, for me, it's just a degree of honesty. And again, it helps build and reinforce trust. And then the critical thing, Penny, is what I spoke about earlier, which is you have to get curious, you have to go and listen to people, and then you have to act. And in that way, you begin to build momentum, and you begin to build a sense of, oh, goodness me, things are happening here. Do you know what I mean? That kind of, I could work with this guy, I can trust him. I'm sure loads of people don't like me, but that kind of, I'm honest, I'm open, I can be trusted, I'm going to get stuff happening, get stuff moving. Lots of organizations, in my experience, do have this kind of knowing, doing gap. Stuff gets stuck. And I'm really passionate about that sort of failing fast. Just have a go, just start, see, stop it if it doesn't work. And I think that so much of that kind of organizational treacle is connected to status. People don't want to get it wrong. Now, I wouldn't advocate, I'm in a highly regulated sector. I wouldn't advocate running a nuclear power plant and sort of having a go. What I mean is, within sensible boundaries, try stuff and fail and just be open about it not working, and that you iterate. And I think if you do that, people recognize and acknowledge your kind of humanity and that you're somebody they can work with. So yeah, so I've taken those things from you, Penny, really, which are give super trust straight away, kitchen sink it immediately, right? And then start doing stuff. Be open, be humble. Two things that I look for in senior leaders: humility and curiosity. That's it. Obviously, they need to be functional experts. If they're a lawyer, they need to have a legal qualification. If they're a finance, needs to be an accountant, etc. But yeah, the only things I look for: humility and curiosity. That's it. then we're good to go. We're going to do a lot of stuff. We're going to get stuff done, and we're going to have fun.
Yeah, I mean, you know that I think the word actually that stuck with me the most throughout the entire conversation is the word you come up with again and again: curiosity.
Yeah.
That I think is so interesting, because it says that you're curious about everything. You go into every level to find out what's stopping them delivering what the purpose is all the time. Curiosity. And you remember, Chris, what he talked about was questions. What Paul Stobart talks about is asking questions. And so the curiosity of finding out what's in people's way. So I'm now going to ask you, because we're just about coming to the end, and I want to ask you a question, and I'm really curious about your answer here.
Oh, go on. I'm slightly nervous now, Penny.
Well, you have been now with Voyage Care, you said, for 8 years.
Yes,
That's
just
a pretty long time to be in one company. So let's assume for the moment that it may be sort of the time when you might consider taking on another role and bringing your vision for purpose and the success of any organization and your passion for it. Describe to me, what would be the ideal company that you'd like to go and take on as your next challenge?
Ooh. Okay, that's a great question. Okay. That is a great question. It would have to have 3 things, or the possibility of 3 things. I'm conscious that I held my 3 things. It would have to have a purpose that I thought was interesting and personally engaging. Number 1. Number 2, it would have to be, or have the potential to be, brilliant in that space. I don't just mean it's quite good and there's an argument about who's the best. I mean, it is or could be very clearly, demonstrably, objectively, these guys are by far the best. And then there's a lot of other people. Which is not an ego or a status thing. It's about the excitement, the inherent kind of excitement of excellence for me, and high quality, and getting the opportunity to work with some really high quality people who recognize that, if that makes sense. So has to have a purpose that I find personally engaging, has to have the potential to be like sector leading. And then the third thing is I'd like to learn a lot personally, because there's loads I've got to learn. There's loads I don't know. You just every day you just think I'm going to run out of time to read all the books that I want to read, and all the articles that I want to read, and all the things I want to understand. I'm going to run out of time in my life. So I'm conscious that I started late, kind of late. I mean, I'm old now, but I'm conscious that I sort of started late. You know, I was working in a Burger King, and like other people had careers that they got off to a flyer. And I feel like I consciously feel like I don't know, maybe it's a kind of personal thing, right? And I always feel a bit like I'm behind the curve, like I'm not worthy, sort of thing. You know, something not worthy is a bit dramatic, a bit emotional. I feel like I've got more to do. I kind of feel impatient, like I've got more to do, like I've got to catch up. Does that make any sense?
It does, even if I don't agree with you at all. It's you saying that you need to catch up. Is there any industry that particularly attracts you?
This is like a sort of a job interview now, Penny. You know that, don't you?
I'm really curious, Andrew, because at some point you're going to need to move on, and I want to see where you think you can have an impact. What industry where you think you could have an impact?
I think I enjoy working in a highly regulated sector. I enjoy working in sectors, as you know, that have purpose, that are multi-site, that are large. So something like children's services, I think, would be really interesting. I was sort of scared before, until the last couple of years, I was sort of scared to do it. But I think I kind of wondering if all the things I've been doing up to now haven't been leading to something like that. So health or care or education, something in that space for me, because it has that immediacy of purpose and impact and difference.
I have to say that bringing purpose more into education, I think, could be transformational.
Yeah, it's really, it's sort of an area. There are lots of areas like this in the UK, right, where you get frustrated, where, you know, that expression, the jury's out. Well, the jury's in on a lot of things, right? The jury's in on prevention is better than cure, and money spent on health prevention has a much bigger impact down the line, and yet we don't do it, right? The jury's in on which education systems around the world work better, and they don't look like the one we have in the UK, for example. So it's kind of a source of passion and frustration, personal frustration for me when I see these things. It kind of goes along with, you know, me when I was first coming to management and into leadership, and it was just kind of, well, I'll do my best. It's like, there is a whole body of work and studies and science. This is not a badge-free profession, and there are things that you should learn. There are things that you should know about. You should understand, like statistics, like how to use data, like what management information tells you, like how to make better decisions, like basic psychology and influencing. You need to understand these things. And so you can hear I get frustrated. I'm getting wound up about a sector that I don't even work in, Penny.
Yeah, but it's one you care about.
Yeah, how can you not care about the future? Is there not caring about the future, you know?
Yeah, you've got children who are growing up, and you'd like them to grow up into a world where the opportunities, education, health, staying healthy, becoming healthy, putting the focus on those areas would be really important here.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
Andrew, our time has come to an end. I can't having a conversation with me. I really hope that people have taken a lot from it. It's great that we did actually get a couple of questions. I suspect we might get a few more coming in afterwards. That invariably what happens. Are you okay if we then forward them on to you if anybody comes in with questions?
Yeah, of course. Of course.
Didn't want to before, but they might want to ask you. It's not public.
I'm very happy. I'm very happy to answer non-public. Well, private would be the word, wouldn't it? I'm very happy to answer any questions you've got.
Okay. Andrew, thank you so much. It's been a delight.
Oh, thanks, Penny. No, nice to see you again, Penny. Take care. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the questions.